Imagine a Roman soldier, just throwing dice in the dirt at the foot of a wooden cross.
Right, just a totally normal day for him.
Yeah, he thinks he is just trying to win a free tunic. He is bored, he is tired, and he just wants to score some extra clothing before his shift ends.
He has absolutely no idea what is actually happening.
No idea at all. He has no clue he is executing a script written before the universe even existed.
It is wild to think about.
It really is. Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into the source material regarding the massive theological collision between an all-encompassing cosmic design and, well, your own daily uncoerced decisions.
This is such a huge topic.
Oh, massive. I mean, have you ever considered whether history is following a specific script? Like, how does your choice to pick up this audio today or the route you drove to work fit into a predetermined design?
That is the big question, right?
Yeah, so we are breaking down the theology of God's plan, pulling from the academic work of Millard J. Erickson, but we are going to make it real for the life you are living right now.
We have to. Otherwise, it just stays as abstract philosophy.
Right, so we are going to take these massive concepts and translate them into mind-bending realities about how human agency actually functions.
Because when you look at that Roman soldier rolling those dice, you are staring right into the core tension of Christian theology.
Yeah, the tension is right there on the surface.
The soldier makes a choice. And it is a real choice. I mean, no one is holding a sword to his back forcing him to throw the dice, right?
Or dictating how they land.
Right. Yet, the outcome of that event and the prophetic fulfillment it secured was decided before time began.
Which is hard for our brains to compute.
Yeah.
We naturally want to categorize things neatly.
Oh, for sure. We want to say we are either mindless robots following a hard-coded program, or we are entirely independent free agents acting in total spontaneity.
But the theological framework we are unpacking today refuses to let you settle for either of those clean, easy categories.
It really does. It forces us to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas in our hands and, discover how they actually operate in perfect harmony.
To start making sense of this, though, we need to establish some boundaries around the vocabulary we're using.
Yes, definitions are everything here.
If we get the definitions wrong at the start, the whole philosophical structure just collapses. So Erickson makes a very deliberate point about why theologians often prefer certain words over others.
He does, yeah. Specifically, he differentiates between the decrees of God and the plan of God.
And I find that distinction fascinating because when I hear the word decree, I get a very specific, almost negative mental image.
Like what?
I picture a medieval king sitting in a cold stone throne room, just shouting arbitrary orders at terrified peasants.
Right, it sounds very harsh.
Yeah, a decree feels like a mandate issued through brute force. Like it demands compliance regardless of what the subjects actually want.
It feels cold and disconnected from any sort of rational design.
Precisely. Which is why Erickson prefers the term plan, right?
Yes, that is spot on. Historically, older theological documents lean heavily on the word decrees. They speak of God's eternal decrees.
Right, which was very standard for the time.
But in modern systematic theology, plan is often preferred because it highlights the unity, intelligence, and consistency of God's intentions.
A plan implies a master architect.
Exactly. I mean, it implies a rational, coherent sequence of events engineered by a limitless mind, rather than just brute force overriding human agency.
It focuses heavily on what God wills to happen across the entire scope of history.
Instead of focusing on what humans are forced to do, it shifts the emphasis from arbitrary commands to a meticulously engineered reality.
Let's unpack the terminology a bit further, because Erickson draws another line in the sand that I found really helpful.
The one between foreordained and predestinate.
Yes. For the listener trying to grasp the scale of this, foreordained seems to act as the broad cosmic umbrella.
It is the absolute wide-angle lens.
Right, covering all matters in history, from the movement of galaxies to the outcome of a world war. But predestinate is a much narrower term.
It is highly specific to the eternal condition of moral agents.
So, human beings and angels.
Right. It refers specifically to their final destination, encompassing both positive election to salvation and the negative aspect of reprobation.
That distinction is so helpful for keeping our categories clear.
It is, though it is worth noting that not all theologians agree on separating them so strictly.
Oh, really? Like who?
Well, for instance, the great Princeton theologian B.B. Warfield argued that foreordained and predestinate are essentially interchangeable.
So for Warfield, they were just synonymous terms.
Yeah, and choosing between them was just a matter of stylistic preference. However, Erickson aligns his definitions much more closely with Louis Berkhoff.
And Berkhoff insists on keeping them distinct.
Yes, by using foreordain for the grand scope of all historical events and reserving predestination strictly for the eternal status of individual moral agents, we maintain analytical clarity.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
It helps us know whether we are discussing the geopolitical rise of Babylon or the eternal soul of an individual.
Exact.
I like to think of this grand scope like an architect designing a colossal, state-of-the-art skyscraper.
That is a great visual.
Before a single brick is laid, before the foundation is poured, before the permits are even filed, the architect holds complete mental and physical schematic of the building.
Right, the whole thing is already finished in his head.
Yeah, the architect knows where the load-bearing walls are, where the plumbing runs, and like how the light will hit the glass atrium at noon on a Tuesday.
It is a totally finished concept.
But let me push back on this analogy on behalf of the listener. Does foreordain mean God sketched out the incredibly trivial details?
What do you mean by trivial?
Well, are we saying the specific brand of breakfast cereal you chose this morning, or the exact moment you hit a red light on your commute, is part of a cosmic schematic?
Oh, I see.
Or is this terminology only reserved for massive historical events, like the rise and fall of empires?
According to this theological framework, it is absolutely all-encompassing. The architect analogy is highly effective, but we have to scale it up to infinity.
So no detail is too small.
None. When we say foreordain, we are not just talking about the massive load-bearing walls of human history. We are talking about the microscopic dust motes floating in the hallway of that building.
Wow.
Erickson's analysis shows that the divine plan is exhaustive. The specific cereal you chose this morning, the flat tire that made you 5 minutes late, the exact trajectory of a raindrop hitting your windshield, all of these fall under the umbrella of foreordination.
Nothing escapes the scope of the design.
Right. Because if an infinite mind is curating reality, there is really no such thing as a trivial detail.
That is a staggering thought.
Yeah.
If we were talking about everything from the collapse of the Roman Empire to my choice of breakfast cereal, I want to look at how the ancient writers actually communicated this idea.
Yes, the biblical linguistics here are fascinating.
When we look at the Old Testament, the ancient Hebrews used very specific terms that paint a vivid picture. There's the Hebrew word yatzar, right?
Yes, which carries this heavy idea of purpose and prior determination.
And it is the exact same root word used to describe a potter shaping clay, which I love.
It is a very tactile image.
Yeah, the potter does not just smash the clay randomly. The potter has a specific vessel in mind before the wheel ever starts spinning.
And then there is the word yats, which centers around counsel and purpose.
What I find so interesting here is the massive contrast between the ancient Hebrew mindset and our modern Western mindset.
Oh, they are completely different worlds.
Yeah, post-Enlightenment thinking has conditioned us to view the universe as a giant machine governed by cold, impersonal natural laws.
We use impersonal language all the time without even thinking about it.
Right, we say, it rained today, or the wind blew, or it is snowing.
But the ancient Hebrews did not view the world through that detached mechanistic lens at all.
For them, there was no impersonal it.
Exactly. God actively sent the rain, God directed the wind, God commanded the snare.
They saw a direct causal link between the divine will and everyday occurrences in the natural world.
Right, and they connected the most massive geopolitical events to the most microscopic personal details with zero hesitation.
You read the prophet Isaiah, and God is talking about the destruction of the Assyrian Empire, turning massively fortified cities into piles of rubble. And God says, "Long ago I ordained it."
It is a grand, sweeping historical claim.
But then you flip over to Psalm 139, and the psalmist is talking about his own unformed body being knit together in the womb.
Right, a totally micro-level event.
He says every single day of his life was written in a book before one of them came to be. So the macro-level destruction of empires and the micro-level shaping of a fetus are treated with the exact same level of divine intentionality.
And if we follow this thread into the New Testament, that theme not only continues, but it intensifies significantly.
We see the introduction of the Greek term periso. Right.
Yes, which literally means to determine beforehand or to predetermine boundaries.
But even more striking than the specific vocabulary is the pervasive sense of necessity surrounding the life of Jesus.
The Greek word dei, which translates to must or it is necessary, is absolutely everywhere in the Gospels.
Jesus constantly says the Son of Man must suffer or he must go to Jerusalem.
He viewed future events, like the fall of Jerusalem or Judas betraying him, not as mere possibilities that might happen if circumstances aligned.
Right, he saw them as absolute, unalterable certainties dictated by a prior plan.
Exactly.
So how does this affect the people actually acting out these events on the ground? Because here is where the mechanics get highly intriguing to me.
It gets very complicated very quickly.
We're looking at fulfilled prophecies, and some of them involve individuals who had absolute zero knowledge of the script they were fulfilling.
That is a brilliant observation from the text.
Because critics of biblical prophecy sometimes argue that prophecies were fulfilled organically by people who knew about them, right?
Yeah, that they had a vested interest in making them happen. The argument goes that Jesus knew the Old Testament, so he intentionally engineered circumstances to match the predictions.
But Erickson highlights multiple instances where the human participants were completely oblivious to the ancient texts they were fulfilling in real time.
Yes. Let's go back to the Roman soldiers casting lots for Jesus' garment at the crucifixion.
Those soldiers were not Jewish scholars trying to fulfill Psalm 22.
Not at all. They had never read the Psalms.
They were pagan executioners acting on passing greed, just trying to score a free piece of woven fabric.
Yet the text presents them as executing an ancient, highly precise script without realizing it.
They thought they were just playing a random game of chance to pass the time, but they were actually carrying out a design written in eternity.
It forces us to reconcile human motivation with divine orchestration.
Right, because the soldiers acted freely according to their own corrupt desires.
They wanted the garment. No one forced them to want it.
Yet their spontaneous actions were perfectly aligned with the predetermined outcome.
Which leads us directly into understanding the anatomy of this divine design.
Rather than just listing out theological points, we can group Erickson's characteristics around the massive philosophical tensions they create.
That is a much better way to digest this.
Let's start by looking at the tension between eternality and freedom.
Okay.
The text insists the plan has no chronological sequence in eternity, only a logical one.
Because God is eternal and exists outside of our timeline, he does not make decisions sequentially.
He doesn't decide one thing on Monday, see how it plays out on Tuesday, and adjust his plan on Wednesday.
Right. It is one coherent, simultaneous, eternal decision.
And he had no advisors. No external counsel was brought in to help set up the physics of the universe.
Plus, unlike pantheistic deities who are bound by their own nature to emanate or create, God faced no internal compulsion.
He did not have to create the universe to cure his own loneliness or fulfill a lack in himself. He was entirely free.
Then we have to examine the tension surrounding glory and inclusiveness.
The highest value in this entire framework, the primary engine driving the plan, is God's own glory.
Human welfare, while highly significant and deeply cared for, is secondary to that primary goal.
And the inclusiveness of the plan is absolute. It includes all ends and all means.
This completely erases the false division we often make between the sacred and the secular.
I love this point. From this theological standpoint, a Sunday morning worship service and a Tuesday morning corporate staff meeting are both equally enveloped in the divine plan.
God is just as sovereign over the spreadsheet as he is over the sermon.
Which moves us into the realm of efficacy and actions.
The plan is absolutely certain. It will happen. There is no plan B.
But a key distinction Erickson makes is that the plan relates to what God chooses to do, not his attributes.
Right? God does not decide to be loving or plan to be powerful. He just is.
The plan is about his actions in history, how he expresses those attributes within the timeline of the universe.
Finally, we have to look at the most difficult tension, which is human agency and constancy.
The plan includes human good acts, such as the Persian king Cyrus, who did not even know the God of Israel, issuing a decree to help rebuild Jerusalem.
But it also includes evil acts, like the betrayal and crucifixion of Christ.
And regarding constancy, people often point to moments in the Bible where God seemingly changes his mind.
Like in Genesis 6, where it says God was sorry he made humanity.
Or in the book of Jonah, where God relents from destroying the city of Nineveh.
Erickson explains these as anthropomorphisms, which is the practice of attributing human emotions to God so our finite minds can grasp his reaction to sin.
Or they are conditional warnings used as the ordained means to bring about the actual planned result of repentance.
Exactly.
I am thinking of this like a master game designer who codes a massive open-world video game.
Oh, I like that analogy.
The players log into the server, And they have total agency within the game environment.
They make unforced choices, they wander where they want, they build structures, they interact freely with other players.
Yeah, yet the designer curated the digital environment, the gravity, the physics, and the spawn rates, so flawlessly that the ending of the game is an absolute certainty from the moment the server boots up.
The players are acting freely based on their own desires, but they are acting within a brilliant, closed system engineered by the creator.
That leads us right into the great historical debate over logical priority.
The classic centuries-old tension between Calvinism and Arminianism.
Both systems are trying to protect something highly valuable.
And the core question at the center of the debate is this: which comes first logically in the mind of God closed? His plan or human action?
Right. So let's break down the Calvinist view first.
In this view, God's plan is logically prior.
God foreknows the future precisely because he already decided what the future would be.
His decision renders human actions certain. The script is written first, and the divine foresight is simply God knowing his own script.
God is not looking into a crystal ball to learn information he didn't previously know.
Conversely, the Arminian view argues that human action is logically prior.
In this model, God uses his omniscience to look down the corridor of time.
He foresees who will freely choose to follow him, and then he bases his plan on that foreseen action.
He predestines those he already knows will say yes.
This view makes the plan conditional on human choice, and the primary motivation here is to preserve absolute libertarian human freedom.
Arminianism wants to ensure that a choice is genuinely free from any prior determinism, protecting the integrity of human love and responsibility.
That is the goal, yes.
Okay, let me push back on the Calvinist view here, because if I'm reading the Bible, this is where the abstract philosophy hits a wall for a lot of people.
Let's hear it.
Think about the whosoever will passages. In Matthew 11, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest."
A very famous invitation.
Right. He offers a wide-open invitation. If the future is totally set by a prior plan, why issue genuine invitations?
That is the common pushback.
If the guest list is already finalized, the RSVPs are locked, and the doors are shut, standing out on the street handing out flyers feels disingenuous, feels like a fake offer.
I see where you were going.
How does the Arminian view attempt to resolve this tension, especially when looking at a verse like Romans 8.29, which says, "For those God foreknew, he also predestined"?
The Arminian looks at Romans 8.29 and sees a chronological sequence of logic that solves the problem of the invitation.
They see God foreknowing first.
Yes. God foreknew, meaning he had factual precognition of what a specific person would decide when presented with the gospel, and based entirely on that knowledge, he predestined them.
Therefore, the invitation in Matthew 11 is entirely genuine because the outcome is based on the human being's autonomous, uncoerced response.
God is simply acquiescing to the choice he already saw the human make in the future timeline.
But Erickson presents a moderately Calvinistic solution that fundamentally challenges that definition of foreknowledge.
This is where we really need a linguistic deep dive, because the whole Arminian argument hinges on how you define the word foreknowledge.
We do need to look closely at the language here.
The Arminian interpretation relies heavily on viewing the Greek word prognosis as simple precognition, the ability to know facts before they happen.
But Erickson, along with many Reformed theologians, traces this Greek word back to its Old Testament roots, specifically the Hebrew concept of yada.
Yes, and the word yada means much more than factual awareness. It denotes an intimate, relational, favorable disposition.
When Amos 3.2 says of Israel, "You only have known of all the families of the earth," it does not mean God was completely unaware that the Egyptians or the Babylonians existed.
Right, obviously he knew they existed factually. It means he chose Israel intimately.
Let me make sure I'm grasping this. If we assume God merely had factual precognition of Israel's faithfulness, as Paul discusses in Romans 11.2 when he says, God did not reject his people whom he foreknew, God would have been factually incorrect.
Why is that?
Because if you read the Old Testament, Israel was wildly faithless. They were constantly rebelling.
That is a very fair point.
So foreknew in Romans cannot possibly mean God looked into the future, saw they would be perfectly obedient, and chose them based on that foresight.
Right, it must mean a prior relational choice, a favorable selection completely independent of their behavior.
That is the exact linguistic argument. Foreknowledge is not just looking into a crystal ball to gather data.
It is an active relational foreloving. Which brings us to the concept of unconditional election.
Erickson points to Romans 9 for this, right? The famous discussion of the twins, Jacob and Esau.
Yes. Paul explicitly writes that before the twins were born, before they had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose and election might stand, God made his selection.
He chose Jacob over Esau.
And this selection happens entirely independent of foreseen actions.
It completely dismantles the idea that God looked down the corridor of time to see who would be the better person or who would have stronger faith and based his plan on that observation.
To reconcile this unconditional selection with human agency, because we still feel like we are making free choices every day, we have to grasp a major philosophical distinction.
We need to define the difference between rendering something certain and rendering it necessary.
Yes, this is key.
If I'm understanding this correctly, rendering an action necessary means the person is forced. They cannot act otherwise against an external physical or mental constraint.
Rendering something certain means God guarantees the outcome will happen, but the person acts according to their own uncoerced natural desires.
Let's expand on the liver analogy Erickson uses to explain this concept because it brilliantly bridges the gap between high theology and daily experience.
It really does. Imagine you walk into a restaurant and open a menu.
I love this concept. Let's say I see a dish made of liver and onions on the menu. Now, I despise liver.
Most people do.
Just the smell of it makes me want to leave the room. When the waiter asks for my order, I have absolute freedom to order the liver.
Your vocal cords work, your brain functions, you can form the words.
No one has a weapon to my head telling me what to order, but I will never, ever order it.
Why not?
Because I am constrained by my own intense disgust. I am free to choose what pleases me, but I am not free to dictate what I find pleasing.
That is a great way to put it.
I did not sit down when I was a toddler and program my taste buds. I did not program my genetics or my environmental upbringing. Freedom means choosing based on who you are, but God sets the parameters of who you are.
That is a highly accurate summary of compatibilist free will. You are choosing freely based on your strongest inclinations at any given moment, but God is the author of the circumstances, genetics, and environment that formed those inclinations.
This ties into John Feinberg's concept of the singular decree.
Feinberg borrows from the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's idea of possible worlds, but he removes the deistic overtones where God acts like a clockmaker who winds up the universe and walks away to let it tick down on its own.
So, out of an infinite number of possible universes God could have created, he actualized this specific singular reality.
He didn't just decree isolated events one by one, he decreed the entire interconnected web of reality as one massive singular package.
He chose the universe where your parents met on a specific Tuesday, where your genetics formed precisely as they did, and where the weather outside your window right now is acting identically to his design.
Precisely. And within that highly specific, meticulously curated web of reality, you make choices that are entirely consistent with your nature and your circumstances.
You are not fighting against the grain of the universe. You are operating freely within its established parameters.
This brings us to the mechanics of the will itself, and how God interacts with it without violating it.
The theologian B.B. Warfield called this concept congruism.
It is a form of soft determinism. God works congruously with the human will.
He persuades individuals so they willingly, without any feeling of violation or coercion, make the intended choice.
John Feinberg has a brilliant classroom illustration for this that I want us to walk through because it clarifies the difference between coercion and persuasion.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a university professor wants a highly disruptive student to leave the lecture hall. There are 3 ways the professor can accomplish this goal. The first is external compulsion.
So the professor walks over, physically picks up the student, and throws them out into the hallway.
Yes, the student's will is completely violated by physical force. They did not want to leave, but they were overpowered.
The second method is internal compulsion.
The professor pulls out a weapon and threatens the student. The student packs their bag and leaves, but they are acting out of terror.
They are constrained by an overwhelming threat.
Their will is still being forced, just internally through fear instead of externally through physical lifting. They choose to walk out, but only to avoid severe harm.
The third method is persuasion. The professor stops the lecture and reasons with the student.
He points out the advantages of leaving, maybe avoiding academic penalty, and the disadvantages of staying.
The student listens, processes the information, weighs the options, and concludes that leaving is actually their best option.
The student packs up their bag and walks out the door entirely of their own volition.
In that third scenario, the professor achieved his exact desired outcome, the student leaving the room, but the student exercised their own uncoerced will to accomplish it.
When this logic is applied to God's interaction with humanity, it is often described as God possessing unlimited charisma.
He does not force the human will. He changes the human heart.
He makes his will so appealing, so rational, and so overwhelmingly beautiful to the individual that they joyfully and freely accept it.
This flips a massive caricature on its head.
Oh, totally.
When people criticize Reformed theology, you often hear them talk about humans being dragged, kicking and screaming into the kingdom of heaven against their will, like victims of a cosmic kidnapping.
Right, which is just completely misunderstanding the mechanics.
But this perspective says it is not about being a robot with overridden programming. It is about being irresistibly charmed by a superior intellect and a superior beauty.
You aren't forced. You are won over. You choose God because God changes your desires so that you want to choose him.
The irony in this debate is that the opposing view, Arminianism, struggles deeply with this exact same problem of freedom, though they often fail to realize it.
Think about the mechanics of foreknowledge.
If God perfectly foreknows a choice you are going to make next Tuesday at noon, that choice is fixed.
It is an absolute certainty. You cannot choose otherwise when Tuesday arrives, or else God's eternal foreknowledge was factually wrong, which compromises his omniscience.
Therefore, pure libertarian freedom, the idea that you have absolute spontaneity and randomness to choose anything at any moment without prior constraints, is a practical impossibility in both systems.
If God knows it infallibly, it is fixed.
Okay, we need to address the massive philosophical elephant in the room. This is the hardest part of the entire discussion.
The problem of the two wills.
Yes. If God renders all things certain and curates this reality perfectly, how can he strictly prohibit sin in the biblical text while simultaneously ordaining a historical timeline where sin constantly occurs?
It is a massive paradox to work through.
The crucifixion of Jesus is the prime undeniable example. Murder is a grievous sin. The brutal execution of an innocent man is horrific.
Absolutely.
Yet the betrayal and murder of Christ was the highly ordained center of the entire divine plan. How do we reconcile God forbidding murder, but ordaining a murder to save the world?
Theologians resolve this immense tension by distinguishing between two senses of God's will. It is a necessary nuance. We can categorize them as will 1 and will 2.
Okay, what is will 1?
Will 1 is God's wish or his preceptive will. This is his general intention, his moral law, his values. In this sense, he desires no sin.
He's perfectly holy, and he commands humanity to be holy. He commands us not to murder.
Will 2 is God's permissive will or decretive will in a specific situation, what he actively decides to permit to occur in the actual timeline of history to achieve a greater goal.
I think the analogy of a mother and a child clarifies this distinction beautifully.
It does. Imagine a mother training her young child. The mother has a general wish, her will 1, that her child would never engage in bad behavior and would never experience pain.
She teaches the child repeatedly not to touch the hot stove.
But let's say the child is stubborn. One day, the mother sees her child about to reach for a mildly hot pan, not hot enough to cause serious tissue damage, but hot enough to cause a painful sting.
She has the physical capability to intervene and swat the child's hand away.
But she intentionally steps back and allows it to happen. She permits the pain.
Her overarching wish was obedience, but her specific will in that momentary situation was to permit the disobedience.
By failing to intervene, she effectively willed the event to happen. But she willed it to teach a harsh, memorable lesson that will keep the child away from the truly dangerous flames in the future.
But let me push back hard on that on behalf of the listener who is wrestling with the ethics of this. Doesn't failing to prevent an evil act make God the author of the evil?
That is the immediate objection most people have.
If I am walking down the street and I can easily stop a crime from happening, but I choose to just watch with my hands in my pockets, human law often holds me culpable. We call it negligence. If God permits the sin, how is he not responsible for the sin?
That is the natural human reaction, but we have to unpack the distinct difference between permitting the conditions for sin and directly causing or commanding the sin.
The Westminster tradition and Reformed theology at large is incredibly careful here.
God never commands anyone to sin. He never injects evil into a person's heart. He does not force the Roman soldier to enjoy gambling for garments.
But by permitting the conditions that lead a person to act on their own existing flawed desires, and by choosing not to physically prevent it, he utilizes that human failure within his broader narrative.
We assign moral responsibility to the agent who commits the act out of their own corrupt desire, not to the infinite mind that permitted the act for a higher structural purpose.
The intent of the human is evil. The intent of God in permitting it is entirely good.
Which brings us to the practical application of all this heavy philosophy.
If everything is certain and God's plan is going to happen regardless of what I do, why bother?
The classic fatalist argument.
Why should the listener try to convince a friend to believe the gospel? Why should we fight for justice or take any moral action at all?
If the script is locked, why not just sit on the couch, eat potato chips, and let history play itself out?
Exactly.
Because God does not just ordain the ends, he simultaneously ordains the means. This is a critical failure in fatalistic thinking.
If the predetermined end result is a beautiful house being built, the ordained means are the carpenters swinging the hammers.
You cannot have the house without the hammers.
Human action, human witness, our daily efforts, our prayers, these are the very mechanisms God wrote into the script to achieve the predetermined ends.
Our actions are not meaningless. They are the essential ordained gears turning the machine of history.
If you do not swing the hammer, the house does not get built.
Let's contrast this Christian view of history with some rival philosophies, because understanding the alternatives really highlights how unique and purposeful this perspective is.
Let's look at a cyclical view, like you find in Hinduism or certain Eastern philosophies.
In a cyclical system, history is a repeating trap. It is a wheel of samsara constantly looping.
It is a cosmic treadmill you cannot get off, and the physical world is something to be escaped.
The only salvation is stepping off the wheel entirely into nirvana, leaving history behind as an illusion.
In contrast, the Christian view of history is strictly linear and redemptive.
It has a definitive beginning in Genesis and a definitive conclusion in Revelation.
The physical world is not an illusion to be escaped. It is a creation to be redeemed and renewed. History is moving toward a specific destination.
Then you have secular philosophies like Karl Marx's dialectical materialism.
Marx viewed history through the lens of class struggle and economic determinism.
He argued that the clash between the thesis and the antithesis would inevitably produce a synthesis, eventually leading to a stateless, classless utopia.
It is a form of rigid determinism, but the mechanism driving the car is cold, blind economics, not a loving mind.
Exactly. Or consider existentialism, which essentially says the train has no conductor, the tracks are random, and life is fundamentally absurd, leading only to despair.
You have to create your own meaning in a meaningless void.
But the framework we are looking at today argues that the force behind history is not a blind economic mechanism, a repeating wheel, or random chance.
It is an infinite intellect that values purpose and guarantees an assured outcome, using the free, uncoerced actions of humanity to draft the chapters of a brilliant narrative.
It is a highly intentional, loving conclusion.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? How does this alter your Tuesday afternoon?
That is the whole point of studying this.
I want to leave you with a thought to mull over long after this audio ends. Think about a seemingly insignificant chance encounter in your past.
Like maybe you missed a train, which caused you to have a random conversation in the station, which led to a new career.
Or maybe you dropped your coffee on your way out the door, making you 10 seconds late, but keeping you out of an intersection where a severe accident occurred.
Those little moments change everything.
If an infinite intellect curates every microscopic circumstance to flawlessly align human free will with a grand redemptive design, how should that alter the way you react to tomorrow's minor inconveniences?
It changes your whole perspective.
I invite you to look at the mundane details of your life, the flat tires, the unexpected emails, the spontaneous interactions, not as random noise or frustrating chaos, but as precise, intentional instruments of a cosmic plan. Everything has a purpose, and you are acting freely within it.